Here's what's coming up on The World Today. Russian court orders oldest civil rights group memorial to shut. Charity Save the Children says 2 of its staff killed in Myanmar attack blamed on the army. Plus, Archbishop Desmond Tutu's daughter recalls proudest memories of her father. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin in Russia, where the Supreme Court has ordered the closure of International Memorial, Russia's oldest human rights group. Memorial worked to recover the memory of the millions of innocent people executed, imprisoned or persecuted in the Soviet era. Formerly, it has been liquidated for failing to mark a number of social media posts with its official status as a foreign agent. That designation was given in 2016 for receiving funding from abroad. But in court, the prosecutor labeled Memorial a public threat, accusing the group of being in the pay of the West to focus attention on Soviet crimes instead of highlighting a glorious past. Meanwhile, Russia has detained 2 allies of jailed Alexei Navalny, a prominent opposition activist. According to officials, they could face extremism charges that carry lengthy prison terms. Russian authorities have in recent months cracked down on groups affiliated with Navalny, who is known as President Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic. He's serving 2.5 years in prison for parole violations related to a fraud case he says was politically motivated. In June, a Russian court ruled that Navalny's anti-corruption foundation was extremist. Then after his allies regrouped around a new network of organizations set up for Russia's parliamentary election in September, authorities started investigating campaign staffers on the same extremism charges. International charity Save the Children has confirmed 2 of its staff members in Myanmar were killed in an attack it blames on the military. The charity says more than 35 bodies, including those of women and children, were found in eastern Kaya state. It claims troops had forced people from their cars, arresting some of them and killing others before burning their bodies. The Myanmar military has denied the claims. Let's shift our focus to the COVID-19 pandemic now. The U.S. has reduced isolation time for asymptomatic infection, plus France tightens restrictions amid Omicron surge. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update. U.S. health officials have reduced the recommended isolation time for people with asymptomatic COVID-19 from 10 to 5 days, amid a surge in cases. The measure is expected to reduce disruption caused by staff shortages in many areas because of infections. The Centers for Disease Control says most transmissions happen in the 2 days before and 3 days after symptoms develop, but experts have criticized the lack of testing requirements to end isolation. Over in France, from January the 3rd, remote working will become compulsory for those who can, and public gatherings will be limited to 2,000 people for indoor events. The news comes as France recorded more than 100,000 new infections on Saturday, the highest number reported in the country since the pandemic began. The new rules also include a ban on eating and drinking on long-distance transport. Nightclubs will remain closed until further notice, and restaurants will be able to provide table service only. However, there will be no curfew for New Year's Eve, and schools will reopen as planned in early January. Australia has reported another record surge in COVID-19 infections as an outbreak of the highly infectious Omicron variant disrupts reopening of the economy. And finally, authorities in China's northwest city of Jihan have expanded COVID-19 testing for residents across the city of 13 million that is currently undergoing lockdown amid a rapid rise in infections. On Monday, the city reported 175 cases, up from the previous day's 150. No Omicron infections have been announced yet from the 810 confirmed cases in the region. China has reported only a handful of Omicron infections among international travelers and in its south. Well, over in England, officials say the government will keep its decision not to impose further COVID curbs under very close review. Environment Secretary George Eustice says the evidence does not support more interventions at the moment. The hospitality sector describes the decision not to add further measures as a lifeline for pubs, bars and clubs. But there is concern about the impact on hospitals and schools of staff having to self-isolate. Well, joining us to discuss more on this is our correspondent in London, Juliana Orlanca. Juliana, thanks so much for joining us on the programme. You know, amid fears of the Omicron variant, how are people reacting to this news that more restrictions won't be imposed ahead of the New Year's?
I think there's a mixed reaction, but on the whole, Teddy, I think people were pleasantly surprised and pleased. Of course, if you look back at the pattern of how Prime Minister Boris Johnson has reacted to a spread of COVID-19, he's typically followed the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, and when she said that she was going to be implementing measures before the new year, I think a lot of people thought that the Prime Minister would follow suit, but alas, that didn't happen. He had an online meeting with his two chief medical advisors, and the government seemed to believe that perhaps the NHS won't be overwhelmed if revellers and others decide to gather in the build-up to 2022. I think really, though, this has been a political decision. Of course, you'll remember, Tenny, that over 100 MPs rebelled against Prime Minister Boris Johnson during the Commons vote to legalise Plan B measures, which are the measures currently in place in England, which means you have to work from home, which means you have to keep your social distancing. Backbench MPs were not happy with that. Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to rely on the opposition Labour Party just to get through that legislation. And, you know, they were not mincing their words in the press. I think the MPs were seeing that Prime Minister Boris Johnson would be on the ropes and potentially out of number 10 if he was to put in further restrictions, especially because all of the data that we had been getting, starting from the data we had had from South Africa a couple of weeks ago, was suggesting that Omicron, yes, does spread more rapidly, but isn't as deadly as other mutations, which is why I believe yesterday the Prime Minister made that a pretty controversial decision not to go ahead with further restrictions in England.
Well, with restrictions sort of put on the side now, the Prime Minister has always said, you know, urging people to get their booster shots. How's that going so far?
Well, I can tell you personally, Teddy, for me, it's going well. Just about an hour ago, I had my third jab in my arm. I'll update you tomorrow if I've got any symptoms. But I did have a third jab, a Moderna jab. I've had 2 Pfizer jabs. It's pretty easy. There are pharmacies as well as other pop-up stations around London where you can literally just pop in. I had no identification on me at the time, just my name, my postcode, and I was able to get a third jab in my arm. I think that's really as simple as it is in the UK, because as you said, the British government believe that they can jab their way out of this. According to the latest data from the Office for National Statistics, I believe about 36 million Brits have already had their booster jab. There are already talks about people having a 4th jab. So people are listening to the government. They are listening to the guidelines, which we can only presume is a good thing. But are people going to listen to the guidelines and be cautious and not go out in the run-up to the new year. We've already seen the data suggesting that people who would traditionally go out on Boxing Day to grab a bargain haven't gone out. They've decided to shop online. Perhaps the only people that will be clubbing their way through the new year, Teddy, will be people crossing the border from Scotland and Wales into England, where there are no restrictions.
All right then, Juliana, thank you so much for the update. As we near 2 years of living with the coronavirus pandemic, the world is working towards the task of mass vaccinations in an effort to reach herd immunity. In South America, one of the regions once hardest hit by the pandemic, countries are seeing a downward trend in cases, and officials say it's the result of the region's vaccination drive.
Throughout much of 2020 and early 2021, South America was ground zero in the global fight against COVID-19. Oxygen ran low in Peru, grave diggers worked through the night in Sao Paulo, bodies were stuffed into shipping containers in Ecuador. The region's largest country, Brazil, saw its COVID-19 death toll rise to the second highest in the world, while Argentina and Peru reported some of the heaviest death per capita figures anywhere. But in recent months, the region has emerged as a surprise winner in the vaccination race. According to our World in Data project, South America is now the most vaccinated continent in the world, with 62.7% of all adults fully vaccinated. Europe comes in second with 60.4%. In Africa, just 8.6% of adults have completed a full vaccination regimen.
Brazil's vaccination coverage has reached a lot of people, and this is very important news, because with the arrival of the Omicron variant, we anticipated the booster dose for many people, and we believe that this will greatly reduce mortality and hospitalizations due to the cases of COVID-19.
Epidemiologists point to several factors to explain the successful vaccination drive. But the most important, they say, has been decades of successful inoculation campaigns that created the infrastructure needed to deliver jabs en masse while instilling trust amongst the population. According to epidemiologists in Brazil, successful inoculation drives in the last half-century against smallpox, meningitis, polio and measles mean that very few people are anti-vax. The region, however, is far from out of the woods, particularly as the Omicron variant spreads across the globe.
The least vaccinated country against COVID-19 in the world, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is struggling to keep up with a fourth wave of the coronavirus, which is pushing its limited healthcare facilities to the brink. Fewer than 300,000 people out of a population of 90 million have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine due to security and other challenges.
At the St. Joseph COVID Treatment Center in Kinshasa, patients lie in ramshackle rooms breathing oxygen from old tanks. The clinic has 38 beds and all but one are occupied. In a backyard littered with medical equipment, tents are needed to cope with the overflow. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the least vaccinated country against COVID-19 in the world. Now a fourth wave of the coronavirus threatens to put greater pressure on its limited health system than at any time during the pandemic.
We have experienced the three previous waves, and gradually we saw the cases increase in the fourth wave. There are overnight jumps. On Monday, we had 5 to 6 cases, and on Saturday, you go straight to between 30 or 36 cases, so 6 times greater. So there is a very rapid rise in COVID-19 cases in the fourth wave.
According to the World Health Organization, the increase is part of an Africa-wide surge that saw weekly COVID cases spike 83% in mid-December, driven by the Delta and Omicron variants, although deaths remain low. The official infection tally in Congo, which has a young population and where few people get tested, is still low compared to many countries, but the low level of inoculations worries health officials, who say that unvaccinated population increase the risk of new variants emerging. Fewer than 300,000 people out of a population of 90 million have received at least one dose, lower than anywhere else. Hostile terrain, remote populations and lack of resources have stunted vaccine rollouts. The recent surge in cases has pushed authorities to ramp up inoculations, and the weekly vaccination rate is at its highest yet. This tented vaccinodrome in the capital Kinshasa is part of that effort, where some who received their shots said they were persuaded to do so because of the latest surge.
With the fourth wave that has entered the Democratic Republic of Congo, we feel, especially in companies and associations, there are a group of people who are saying that they can see cases all around them and that they must protect themselves, and this really has an effect on the number of vaccinations. This is because people understand that apart from vaccination, there is no other way to protect themselves against COVID-19.
Before, we were in the dark about the consequences associated with this fourth wave of COVID-19. This is too strong, and COVID really exists. And to protect myself, I've come to get the vaccine.
Health workers at the center are vaccinating around 200 people per day, but that is still below its 300 per person capacity.
And over in Somalia, allies and international observers have expressed alarm over the escalating power struggle between the country's president and prime minister as heavily armed factions patrol parts of the capital, Mogadishu. Soldiers loyal to Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble have reportedly taken up positions near the presidential palace, while others parade the streets.
Relations between President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed and Prime Minister Mohamed Roble have long been frosty, but the latest developments have sparked concerns for Somalia's stability as the country struggles to hold long-delayed elections. Suspending the Prime Minister on Monday, President Mohamed accused him of interfering with a probe into a land grab case and withdrawn his mandate to organize elections. Prime Minister Roble, in turn, has accused the president of attempting to carry out a coup against the government, the constitution and the rules of the country, and sabotage the vote. The U.S. Embassy urged de-escalation from both sides in the Horn of Africa country. The pair first clashed in April when the president unilaterally extended his 4-year term by 2 years, prompting army factions loyal to each man to seize rival positions in the capital, Mogadishu. The confrontation was resolved when the president put Roble in charge of security and organizing delayed legislative and presidential elections, and parliament reversed the presidential term extension. Somalia began holding parliamentary elections on November 1st, which were supposed to be completed by December 24th, but only a few of the 275 representatives have been elected. The country, which has had only limited central government since the civil war began in 1991, is trying to reconstruct itself with the help of the United Nations. It had intended to hold its first direct elections in more than 3 decades this year amid chronic instability.
The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu has been honored by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa with a Category 1 special funeral set to take place on Saturday, New Year's Day. A state funeral of this kind usually involves displays by the SANDF, but officials say Archbishop Desmond Tutu did not want any display. As part of this funeral designation, the national flag will be flown at half-mast throughout the country and at South African diplomatic missions worldwide until the evening of the funeral. While visiting the home of the late Archbishop to pay his respects, President Ramaphosa said the country is devastated by his death.
We've just spent a wonderful few minutes with Mama Leah Tutu and the family and the friends who are paying their condolences and comforting the family. So he really, as an outstanding religious leader, really exuded love, embraced our people as a nation right across the various racial groupings in our country, embraced them and participated in the building of the South African nation. And if there ever was one person who really promoted social cohesion, it was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. A lot of great things can be said about him. his global status, the love that he was and is being showered with from across the various countries in the world, just speaks volumes of what he stood for. And we are humbled to be given this opportunity to participate in honoring this great man.
Meanwhile, as South Africans celebrate the life of anti-apartheid hero Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died on Sunday, his daughter, Nontombi Naomi Tutu, has recalled the day her father stepped in to save a young man from being buried alive by an angry mob as one of her proudest memories.
For me, one of the proudest moments, and it happened when I was actually living already in the States. And it was at the funeral when the young people were going to kill the person who had been identified as Impini. And I got a call from the TV station in Hartford, Connecticut, saying, we have film from South Africa of your father saving somebody. We would like you to come and see it and talk to us about it. And I mean, you know, to see that and to see him going in, you know, there were so many things striking about it. One was that he had the courage to go into the crowd and say, no, this is not how we do it. But the other is that those young people listened, right? That there was a dignity in our struggle, that these young people, they could have said, Sugawena, who are you to tell us about these people who are selling us out? But there was still that respect for Udedi and the other clergy, that, you know, here are clergy people who are asking us to step back from this action. We were not there as he passed. My siblings and I were not there, but we had been with him the day before, and he, as I said, you know, he was ready. He was ready, and he went to meet his God ready and willing.
And that's the moment Jordan's parliament erupted into a mass brawl as disagreements over constitutional amendments ended with MPs throwing punches. The session was set to discuss draft amendments to the constitution proposed by the cabinet, including an amendment that would better represent women. Speaker Abdul Karim Al-Dagni was forced to adjourn the session after verbal exchanges escalated into a fistfight. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Bye for now.